the two smallest living things I have ever held fit together in the palm of one hand. And I spent the worst and best night of my life keeping them warm against my chest while an entire world tore itself apart looking for them. And I did not know, until almost the end, that the thing searching the dark for those two tiny lives was their mother, and that she would have burned the planet down to get them back. My name is Dalia Onkwo Okonkwo. The translators always mangle it. I ran a weather monitoring station on a colony world called Sursa, alone, by choice, because I liked the quiet and the storms and the not having to explain myself to anyone. I was the wrong person for what happened to me. That's the truth of it. I was a person who had spent years arranging my life so that nothing would ever need me. And then on one storm-black night, two helpless things needed me more than anything has ever needed anyone. And it cracked my whole careful life open, and I have been a different person since. Let me tell you how it happened. I've never told it all the way through. It still undoes me. But it deserves telling because the galaxy got it backwards. They tell it as a story about a terrifying alien queen and a planet-wide hunt, all menace and fear, and that's not what it was at all. It was a story about a frightened mother and a stranger who kept her children warm. That's the whole of it underneath. Let me tell it right. I need to tell you about Sursa first, and about the storms, because the storm is where it starts. Sursa was a young colony world mixed species, which was unusual, a place where humans and several other peoples had settled together because the world was rich and empty and there was room for everyone. The largest of the other peoples were the Vale. I'll tell you more about the Vale as we go, because understanding them is the whole key to the story, but for now, they were a hive people. Not the way the old scary stories mean it, not mindless, not a swarm. They were warm and complex and deeply social, organized around their queen mothers, who were the heart of everything, the center of every Vale community. The Vale had a city on the far side of Sursa's main continent, and humans had our scattered settlements and stations, and mostly we lived alongside each other in the easy, distant way that peoples do when there's enough room not to crowd. My station sat alone, far out on the storm coast, where Sursa's great seasonal storms came roaring in off the Southern Ocean. That was the whole reason the station existed, to track those storms, to give the colony warning when the big ones built. The storms on Sursa were enormous, the kind of weather that doesn't exist on tame worlds, walls of wind and rain and lightning that came up the coast like the end of the world and lasted for days. I loved them. That probably tells you something about me, that I took the loneliest posting on the planet so I could be alone with the worst weather it had. I loved the violence of the storms and the safety of my little reinforced station in the middle of them. The way you can love a thing that could kill you as long as there's a wall between you and it. I'd been out there 8 months when the night happened. 8 months mostly alone, just me and the instruments and the storms, talking to the colony by comm and to no one in person for weeks at a stretch. I was good at it. I want you to understand that I was good at being alone, that I had built a whole self out of being alone, that alone was the thing I was best at because that's what makes the rest of it matter. The night the children came, I was the most alone person on the planet, by design, on purpose, and it turned out to be the night I was needed most, and the irony of that has never once stopped being funny and terrible to me. The storm that night was a bad one. I'd been tracking it for 2 days as it built off the Southern Ocean, and it came ashore after dark, and it was a monster, one of the worst I'd seen in my 8 months. The wind came up the coast screaming. The rain hit the station walls like gravel. The lightning was so constant that the night outside my windows strobed white and black, and the thunder didn't roll, it just cracked over and over close. I had the station sealed up tight, and I was riding it out the way I'd ridden out a dozen others, with hot tea and the instruments humming and a kind of fierce contentment, alone in my little fortress in the middle of the planet's fury. And then, under the thunder, I heard a sound that wasn't the storm. It was small. That's the thing I remember. In all that enormous noise, this tiny sound, a thin, high, desperate sound, two of them, almost too small to hear, coming from outside, from the lee side of the station where the wind broke around the walls. I almost didn't hear it. I almost told myself it was the wind finding a new gap to whistle through. But I'd lived alone with that storm for 2 days, and I knew every sound it made. And this was not one of them. And something in me, some part I'd buried under 8 months of careful solitude, made me get up and go to the airlock and cycle it open into the screaming dark. I found them on the lee step, just outside the door in the small sheltered angle where the wind couldn't quite reach. Two of them, tiny, soaked, half frozen, barely moving, making that thin, desperate sound that had somehow carried over the whole storm, or maybe hadn't carried at all. Maybe I'd heard it some other way, some way I still don't understand, the way a mother hears her child cry across a crowded room. Two tiny living things, smaller than my hand, abandoned or lost or fallen from somewhere into the worst storm of the season, dying on my doorstep. I did not know what they were. I want to be clear about that because it matters for what came after. I did not recognize them. They were small and strange, soft-shelled, six-limbed, their tiny faces a cluster of features I had no name for, and they could have been anything, some Circan animal, some creature blown in from the wild coast. I had no idea. All I knew, looking at them on that step in the strobing lightning, was that they were alive and small and dying, and that no living thing should die alone and cold in the dark while there was a warm, dry person 10 feet away who could stop it. So I picked them up, both of them in my two cupped hands, and I brought them inside, and I sealed the airlock against the storm, and that one act, picking up two small dying things out of the rain, that one ordinary act of an alone person who didn't even particularly want to be needed, was the thing that put me at the center of the worst planet-wide panic in the history of the Circa colony, and changed my life, and very nearly ended it. They were so cold. That was the emergency, the first hours. They were so cold I thought they would die in my hands, and everything I did that night I did against that cold. I dried them, gently with the softest cloth I had, two tiny soaked shivering things. I didn't know what they ate or whether they could eat. I didn't know anything about them. All I knew was warmth, that they needed warmth, that the cold was killing them, and the only thing I had to fight it with was my own body. So I did the thing you do, the thing every human knows in their bones even if they've never done it, the oldest instinct there is. I put them against my chest, inside my shirt, against my own skin, where the warmth was two tiny cold lives held against the warmest part of me, and I wrapped myself in a blanket around them, and I sat down in the middle of the storm, and I held them, and I waited to find out if they would live. They stopped shivering after a while. I felt it happen, the shivering easing, the tiny bodies going from rigid and cold to soft and warm against my skin, and I felt their breathing. They did breathe, fast and shallow and tiny, slow and steady into something that wasn't dying anymore. And then against my chest, in the warm dark inside my shirt, the two of them did a thing that broke something open in me that I'd kept shut for years. They settled. They burrowed in against my skin, against my heartbeat, and they made a new sound, not the thin, desperate cry, but a low, soft thrumming, a contentment sound. The sound of two small creatures who had been dying in the cold and were now warm and safe against a heartbeat, and they fell asleep. They fell asleep on my chest, trusting me. Two tiny, strange lives that had been freezing to death an hour before, asleep and thrumming and safe, against the heart of a woman who had spent years making sure nothing ever needed her. And I sat there in the stormlight and I cried quietly, so as not to wake them, because I had not held anything that needed me in a very long time, and I had forgotten what it did to you, and it turned out it did everything. I would have done anything to keep them alive after that. I didn't decide it. It just became true, the way it became true the moment they settled against my heart. Whatever they were, wherever they'd come from, they were mine to protect now, because they had fallen asleep trusting me, and I have never in my life been able to betray a thing that trusted me, and two tiny aliens asleep on my chest had just become the thing I would most fiercely protect in the entire galaxy. I didn't know what I was holding. I didn't know what was coming. I just knew I wasn't letting go. Now I have to tell you about the other side of that night, the side I didn't know about until later, because it was happening at the same time, on the far side of the world, and it is the half of the story the galaxy remembers and gets wrong. On the far side of Circe, in the Veil City, a queen mother had lost her sons. Her name, the closest the translators could come, was Isith. She was a queen mother of the Veil, which I have to explain, because the word queen makes you think of the wrong thing entirely. A Veil queen mother was not a ruler in the way humans mean. She was a mother, on a scale humans don't have, the literal mother of an entire community, hundreds of children, bound to every one of them by a connection the Veil had that we don't, a kind of constant low awareness of each of her children, a sense always of where they were and whether they were well. A Veil queen mother felt her children the way you feel your own hands, all of them, all the time, a warm, constant background hum of they are here, they are safe, they are mine. And that night, the night of the storm, two of Isith's youngest sons, two newly hatched ones, barely days old, too young to have names yet, had been lost. I learned the details later. There had been an accident in the storm, a transport, a young caretaker, a moment of chaos as the great weather came in, and two tiny hatchlings swept away, lost, gone, somewhere out in the enormous violent dark of the storm coast. And Isith, in her city on the far side of the world, had felt it happen. Had felt in that constant warm hum of all her children, two small lights go suddenly distant, faint, frightened, cold. Felt her two newest sons swept out into a killing storm, too far to reach, too small to survive, and had been able to do nothing but feel them out there in the dark, freezing, fading, terrified, calling for a mother who could not come. I cannot imagine it. I have tried, and I cannot. To feel your children dying at a distance in real time, through a connection you cannot switch off, to know exactly that they are cold and frightened and alone, and to be utterly unable to reach them. It would drive any mother mad. It nearly drove Isith mad. And out of that madness, that unbearable maternal agony, she did the thing that the galaxy remembers, the thing the title of this story is named for. She declared a planet-wide hunt. Every veil on Circe, every resource the city had, every flyer, every searcher, every soldier of the hive, Isith threw all of it into the storm, into the dark, a desperate, frantic, planet-spanning search for two tiny lights she could still faintly feel, somewhere out on the storm coast, growing fainter. The galaxy tells it as a terrifying thing. The alien queen declared a hunt, the hive mobilized, the soldiers swept the world, and makes it sound like menace, like war, like something to be afraid of. It wasn't menace. It was a mother who could feel her babies dying in the dark, throwing everything she had and everything she was into finding them before the connection went silent. The planet-wide hunt was not a war. It was the largest act of desperate love the Circe colony had ever seen. And it was sweeping toward my lonely station on the storm coast, hour by hour, through the rain, hundreds of frantic veil searchers and soldiers, following two faint maternal threads toward the one place on the planet those threads led. A sealed weather station where a human woman sat in the stormlight with two tiny warm sleeping lights held against her heart, having no idea that the most powerful grief in the galaxy was coming for her in the dark. I felt them growing stronger, the two on my chest, all through that long night. That was the strange and wonderful thing. As the hours passed and the warmth did its work, the two tiny lives went from barely alive to sleeping to, near dawn, awake, awake and warm and curious, two tiny faces peeking out from the neck of my shirt, looking up at me with those clustered alien features that I was beginning already to be able to read, to find expressive, to love. They were hungry. I worked out, by trial and gentle error, that they could take a little of the warm, sweetened water I made for myself, and they took it from my fingertip, tiny and trusting, And I sat there at dawn with the storm finally easing outside and two impossible tiny aliens taking water from my hand. And I was as happy as I have ever been in my life. And I had no idea, none, that an entire grieving hive was closing in on my station. And that within hours I would be standing between two tiny sleeping children and a host of frantic soldiers, having to make the people searching for them understand, before anyone did anything they couldn't undo, that the missing sons of their queen were not lost at all. That they were warm, that they were safe, that they were asleep even now against a human's chest. That someone had heard them crying in the storm and gone out into the dark and picked them up and kept them alive. They came at dawn, out of the last of the storm, and I almost got myself killed in the first 30 seconds because I did not understand what was happening. I want to tell this part carefully because the galaxy tells it as a confrontation, the brave human facing down the alien soldiers, and that's not what it was, not really. It was a terrible misunderstanding between people who were both, in their own way, trying to protect children. That's the truth that the heroic version flattens out, and the truth is better. I heard them before I saw them. Over the dying storm, a sound flyers, a lot of them coming up the coast low and fast, and then voices, alien voices, calling out in a tongue my station's translator caught only in fragments, urgent, overlapping, frantic. I'd had no warning. My comm had been down half the night from the storm, and so the first I knew of the hunt was the sound of it arriving, dozens of flyers settling around my little station in the gray dawn light, and Vale pouring out of them. Vale I'd never seen up close, tall and six-limbed and fast, and some of them armored, the hive's searchers and soldiers, swarming toward my station in a way that every instinct read as an attack. And I had two tiny sleeping children against my chest. I did the thing you do. I didn't think. There wasn't time to think. The thinking part of me was still catching up. I sealed the inner door and I put my body between the airlock and the two hatchlings, and when the Vale reached the station and began trying to get in, and they were trying hard, urgently, with a desperation I read as violence, I stood in the middle of my own station with my arms wrapped around the two warm sleeping lives on my chest, and I shouted at the door that they couldn't have them, that I wouldn't let them, that they'd have to come through me. I thought they were predators. That's the awful truth of those first minutes. I had two tiny helpless creatures who'd been abandoned in a storm, and now a swarm of armored aliens was clawing at my door to get to them, and the only story that fit was the obvious one, that these were the things the babies had been running from, that I was the last line between two innocents and whatever wanted them. I was wrong. I was completely wrong. But I want you to understand that I was wrong for the right reasons, because I was protecting children, because the two on my chest had trusted me, because I had promised, somewhere in the long warm night, that nothing would get past me to hurt them. I was ready to die in that station for two creatures I'd known for one night. I would have too. That's the part I'm not ashamed of, even knowing how wrong I was about everything else. The airlock gave. Vale are strong and there were many of them, and my little station was not built to keep out a determined hive. The outer door failed and they came through into the lock, and the inner door failed, and they came into my station, 3, 4, 6 of them, huge in that small space, armored fast, and I backed into the corner with my arms locked around the hatchlings, and I made myself as much of a wall as one human woman can make. And then everything stopped. I'll never forget the stopping. The Vale came pouring in, frantic, and they saw me, and they saw what I was holding, and every one of them froze, all at once. The whole desperate, violent momentum of them just arrested mid-motion, as if they'd hit a wall, and the small space went from chaos to absolute stillness in the space of a breath. They stared at me, at the two tiny faces peeking out of my shirt, awake now, blinking sleepily up at the commotion, warm and dry and unmistakably, visibly alive. And the lead Vale, a searcher, I learned later, not a soldier, the one who'd been guided here by the Queen Mother's thread, made a sound I had never heard and have never forgotten. A sound that needed no translator. A sound that every parent in the galaxy would know in their bones. A great broken exhalation of relief. The sound of a terror held for too many hours finally, suddenly, released. The searcher sank down, all the way down, folding those tall limbs, going low and small in a gesture I didn't understand then but understand now as the deepest veil expression of I mean no harm. I am no threat, please, and it stayed there, low on the floor of my station, staring at the two hatchlings on my chest, and it began, in its alien way, to weep. I did not understand. I stood in my corner, arms still locked around the babies, ready for an attack that had simply evaporated, and I watched a swarm of armored aliens go from clawing at my door to kneeling on my floor weeping, and I could not make sense of it. The translator caught a word then from the weeping searcher, a word it could render, repeated over and over toward the two hatchlings. Found, 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 found. And slowly, slowly, the truth began to rearrange itself in my head. They weren't predators. They weren't here to take the babies from me. They were here to take the babies home. The frantic swarm at my door had not been an attack. It had been a rescue that had arrived to find the rescue already done, the lost children already safe, already warm, already alive against the chest of a stranger who had no idea what she'd been protecting them from, which was nothing, which was only the cold and the storm, which she had already beaten hours before they ever arrived. I had been standing between two children and the people who loved them most. And the people who loved them most had taken one look at me holding those children warm and safe, and had fallen to the floor of my station and wept with relief. I lowered my arms, slowly. I was still half-braced, my body still not believing the danger was gone, but the babies on my chest had started thrumming again, that contentment sound, the safe sound, and they were reaching now, their tiny limbs stretching out of my shirt toward the weeping searcher, recognizing, in some way I couldn't perceive, their own people. And the searcher looked up at me, low on the floor, and made another gesture, both upper limbs spread wide and open, palms up, and the translator gave me the word. Please. Not give them to us, not a demand, please. A request from a creature that could have simply taken them, that vastly outnumbered me, that had every right and every power to take its own queen's children from a human stranger, and instead it knelt on my floor with its hands open and asked, please, because it understood somehow in that first moment what the two thrumming babies told it without words, that this human had not stolen them or hurt them or held them captive, that this human had saved them. And you do not take a saved child from its savior's arms by force. You ask. You kneel down and you open your hands and you ask. I knelt down too. I don't fully know why. It felt right, going low the way the searcher had gone low, meeting it on the floor of my station. Two creatures from opposite ends of the galaxy kneeling together over two tiny children. And I did the thing that I think, looking back, was the most important thing I did in the whole story, more important than going out into the storm, more important than warming them through the night. I did not hand the babies over. Instead, I opened my shirt a little, gently, so the searcher could see them, could see they were whole and warm and well, and I let the babies choose, let them reach, on their own from my chest toward their own people, at their own pace, so that no one took them and no one surrendered them, so that the handing over was the children's own movement and not an act done over them. And the two hatchlings, warm and safe and surrounded now by the thrumming of their own kind, reached out of my shirt, and the searcher gathered them up so gently, so carefully, those huge strong limbs cradling the two tiny lives like the most precious things in the universe, which to the veil they were, and held them. And the whole station full of armored veil made that low thrumming sound together, all of them, a sound like a hive breathing out, and the two lost sons of the Queen Mother were, at last, found and gathered and home. I sat back on the floor of my station, and I felt all at once the strangest grief. Because they were safe, they were safe. It was everything I'd wanted through that long night, and they were also no longer mine, no longer warm against my chest, gone from me into the arms of their own people in the space of a breath, and the cold place on my chest where they'd been was the loneliest thing I had ever felt. I had had them for one night, and I had not known, until they were lifted away, how completely they had filled the careful, empty place I'd spent years building. The Queen Mother came an hour later. The searchers had sent word the moment the babies were found, sent it through the threads, the hive connection, so that on the far side of the world Isith had felt it happen, had felt her two distant fading lights suddenly flare back to warm and safe and here, after a night of feeling them freeze and fade in the dark. I cannot imagine what that was for her, to feel your dying children come back to life all at once, from a distance, the terror of a whole night released in a single instant. The searchers told me later that the whole Vale city had felt it through her, that the Queen Mother's relief had been so vast it had washed through every Vale on the planet, hundreds of thousands of them feeling, second-hand, the moment their queen's lost sons came home. And then Isith came, herself in person, fast as her flyers could carry her, across the whole world to the Storm Coast station where her children had been saved. I had never seen a Vale Queen Mother. I was not prepared. She was large, larger than the others, ancient and powerful, and radiating a presence I felt before I understood, a kind of gravity, the sense of being near something that hundreds of lives orbited. The searchers and soldiers in my station went low the moment she entered, all of them, that deep folding gesture, and the small space was suddenly full of the weight of her. And I didn't know the protocols. I didn't know anything. I was just a tired human woman who'd been up all night. I stood there, not knowing what to do, facing an alien queen who had crossed a world to reach the place where her children had nearly died. She looked at me for a long moment, and I braced for what I didn't know, anger maybe that a human had handled her sacred children, or the cold dismissal of someone powerful for someone small. I had handled her sons. I had held them against my bare skin. Perhaps that was a violation. Perhaps I had done something terrible without knowing it. I braced for the Queen Mother's judgment. And the Queen Mother Isith, the most powerful being on the planet, crossed my little station and went low, went down, the deep folding gesture, the one her own soldiers made for her, the gesture of I am no threat, I mean no harm, please. She made that gesture, the Queen, to me, to a human weather keeper, and the whole station of Vale made a sound of astonishment, because a Queen Mother does not go low to anyone, and she had just gone low to a stranger. And through the translator, in a voice that shook with something too large for the small machine to fully carry, Isith said, "You heard them in the storm. You heard my children crying in the dark when their own mother could not reach them, and you went out into the storm and you brought them in and you kept them warm against your own heart through the whole long night. I felt it. I felt them stop dying. I felt them go warm and safe, and I did not know how, I did not know who, I only knew that somewhere out in the dark, when I could not save my own sons, someone did." Her voice broke, even through the machine. "It was you. You are the someone. You kept my children alive. There is no gift in the galaxy I would not give you. There is nothing I have that is not yours. You held my dying sons against your heart, and you would not let them go, and you are a stranger, and you are a human, and you did not have to, and you did it anyway. Why? Why would you do that, for children that were not yours, of a people not your own, on the worst night of the year alone?" I have thought about that question for the rest of my life. Why would you do that? And I am going to tell you what I answered, because it is the heart of the whole thing, and because it surprised me even as I said it. I knelt down the way she had, the way the searcher had, so that we were low together on the floor of my station, the Queen and the Keeper. And I said, "Because they were crying, and I could hear them, that's all. There wasn't a reason bigger than that. I heard something crying in the dark, and it was cold, and it was small, and it was going to die alone, and I had a warm place and 2 hands. You don't need a reason for that. You just need to be close enough to hear, and willing to go out into the storm. That's the whole of it." I looked at the 2 tiny faces, peeking now from the searcher's arms, watching me. I'd spent a long time making sure nothing ever needed me. Years. I thought that was peace. And then two of the smallest things in the world needed me more than anything has ever needed anyone, and I found out I'd had it backwards the whole time. Being needed like that, being trusted like that, it's not a burden. It's the thing, it's the whole thing. They didn't owe me anything for saving them. I owe them. They gave me back something I didn't know I'd lost. So please don't thank me, Isith. Don't give me gifts. They already gave me more than I gave them. I just heard them crying. Anyone close enough would have. And Isith looked at me, low on the floor, and I watched the Queen Mother of the Vale understand something about humans that, I learned later, changed the way her whole people saw us. Because she had asked why, expecting, I don't know what she expected. A calculation, a hope of reward, the kind of reason the galaxy's careful peoples give. And instead she got they were crying and I could hear them, anyone close enough would have. And she understood that she was looking at a person who had risked her life for strangers' children in a storm and genuinely, completely, did not think it was remarkable. Who thought it was just what you do. Who was, in fact, a little baffled at being thanked for it. Anyone close enough would have, Isith repeated softly through the machine. And then she said the thing that the Vale still say about humans, the thing that spread across her whole people from that night. No, not anyone. That is the thing you do not understand about yourselves. Most peoples, hearing children cry in a storm, would have stayed warm and dry behind their walls and told themselves it was not their concern, not their kind, not their problem. We would have once before we knew you. But you do not even hear the question. You hear crying and you go. You do not weigh it. You do not decide. You simply go into the storm for strangers because something small is in the dark and you can hear it. That is not anyone. That is you. That is what your people are. And the galaxy is only beginning to learn what it means to share the stars with a people who cannot hear a child cry without going out into the storm. Here is the part of the story that nobody expects, and it is the part I most need to tell, because it is the truest thing I learned that whole strange year. After the Queen Mother took her children home, after the gifts I refused and the thanks I couldn't accept and the whole hive's relief washing over my little station, after all of it, when the flyers had gone and the storm had blown out, and I was alone again in my weather station on the storm coast, exactly as alone as I had been before, with everything I'd wanted having come true, and the two lost children safe and home where they belonged. I fell apart. I didn't expect it. I'd done the thing right. I'd saved them. They were safe. The story had the happiest ending a story can have. And I sat in my station that evening with the cold place on my chest where they'd slept, and I cried harder than I'd cried in years, because I had had them for one night and now I would never have them again. And because two palm-sized lives had reached into the careful empty fortress I'd built out of my life and shown me, in the space of one night, exactly how empty I'd made it. I had spent years arranging my life so that nothing would ever need me, and I had succeeded. And the success, which I'd called peace, turned out to be the loneliest thing in the world, and I only found that out by holding, for one night, the opposite of it. That's the cost they don't tell you about in the heroic version. Saving something that needs you doesn't fill the empty place. It shows you the empty place. It pulls back the curtain you'd hung over it years ago and makes you see, all at once, the size of the thing you'd been pretending you didn't have. I'd been lonely for years and called it solitude. Two tiny aliens asleep on my chest had been the first thing in a long time to call it by its real name, and now they were gone, and I had to sit alone with the name they'd left behind. I think I would have closed back up after a while. I think I would have hung the curtain back over the empty place and gone back to being good at being alone if I'd been left to it. People do. The fortress is comfortable, even when it's killing you, especially when it's killing you. But Isith did not leave me to it. She came back. That's the thing. 3 days later, when the colony had moved on and the story was already turning into the galaxy's flattened heroic version, the Queen Mother of the Vale came back to my Storm Coast station, alone this time without the searchers and the soldiers, and she sat with me, folded those tall limbs down into my small human space, And she did a thing I had not expected anyone, human or alien, to do for me ever again. She paid attention to me. She saw that I was not, in fact, fine. She saw the cold place on my chest as clearly as if it were a wound, because she was a mother, and mothers see, and she had felt, through her children's fading memory of that night, exactly what I had given them and exactly what it had cost me to give it. "You are grieving," she said, through the translator, not as a question. "You saved my sons, and it broke something open in you, and now you are alone with the broken open place, and you do not know how to live with it. I know this grief. I have felt it in my own people. It is the grief of someone who guarded their heart so well for so long that they forgot they had one until something small got past the guard. And now the heart is awake, and an awake heart in an empty life is the loneliest thing there is." I couldn't speak. She had named it exactly, the awake heart in the empty life. "I owe you everything," Isith said. "I told you that, and I meant it, and you refused all my gifts, which only made me more certain I owed you. So I am not going to offer you a gift. I am going to offer you the only thing that can actually answer the grief you are in. I am going to offer you a place." She gathered herself, and what she said next changed my life. "My sons, the two you saved, they are bonded to you now. Did you not know? The veil bond to those who keep us alive in our first days. It is how we are made. The first warmth a hatchling knows, the first heartbeat it sleeps against, the first hands that keep it from the cold, those become part of it, woven into what it is forever. My two youngest sons spent the first night of their lives against your heart, kept alive by your warmth, and they are bonded to you, Dalia, as surely as they are bonded to me. They will know you all their lives. They will reach for you. There is a place in their hearts that is shaped like you and will never be shaped like anyone else." She paused. "And I am asking, not offering, asking, because the asking is mine to do and the choosing is yours. I am asking you to be what that bond makes you, to be their second mother. To come into the life of my hive, not as a stranger who did us a kindness, but as family, because that is what the bond has already made you, whether the galaxy has a word for it or not. I want to tell you what I felt, hearing that, because it is the thing the whole story is for. I had spent years making sure nothing would ever need me. And the deepest reason, the one under all the other reasons, the one I'd never said out loud even to myself, was that I was afraid. Afraid of being needed and then losing the thing that needed me. Afraid of the cold place on the chest. I'd lost people before Circe, before the station. That's a story for another time, but it's why I'd come to the loneliest posting on the planet, why I'd built the fortress, why I was so very good at being alone. I had decided, somewhere in my grief, that the way to never feel the cold place again was to never let anything warm enough to leave one. And it had worked. And it had been killing me by inches, the way that kind of safety always does. And now here was a queen mother of an alien people, telling me that I didn't have to choose between the empty fortress and the unbearable cold place. That there was a third thing, the thing I'd been too afraid to believe in. The thing where you let something need you and you keep on letting it. Where the bond doesn't end when the night ends. Where the warmth on your chest isn't a thing you have for one night and lose, but a thing you get to keep showing up for, again and again, for the rest of your life. A family. She was offering me a family. The thing I'd spent years convincing myself I didn't want because I couldn't survive wanting it. I said yes. Of course I said yes. I'd known I would say yes from the moment she said the word bonded, from the moment I understood that the two tiny lives I'd grieved as lost to me were not lost at all, that the cold place on my chest was not a wound but an invitation, that the very thing that had broken me open was the thing that was going to put me back together better than I'd been before. I said yes, and the Queen Mother of the Veil made a sound of joy that didn't need a translator, and 3 days after I'd grieved them as gone forever, I went home with Isith to the hive, to begin the strangest and best chapter of my life. A lonely human weather-keeper, become the second mother of 2 Veil princes, woven into the warm, enormous family of a hive that had been searching the storm for the children I'd already saved. I have to tell you what became of it because it didn't end with me going home to the hive. It got larger than me. These things do. The story spread not the flattened heroic version, but the true one, the one Isith herself told, again and again, to her own people and then to the galaxy. The story of a human who heard children crying over the roar of a whole storm and went out into it without weighing the cost, and kept 2 dying babies warm against her own heart all night, and stood ready to die protecting them from the very people who loved them, and then refused every reward and was baffled at being thanked, because to her it was simply what you do. Anyone close enough would have, she'd said. And Isith had answered, no, not anyone, you. And the Veil, who had not known humans well before that night, began to understand something about us that changed how they saw us, and then how their whole web of allied hive peoples saw us, and then how a good part of the galaxy saw us. They had thought of humans before, the way the galaxy mostly did, a young, loud, unpredictable people, useful, a little frightening, hard to categorize. And the story of Dalia and the storm gave them a category at last, and it was not the one anyone expected. It was this: humans are the people who go out into the storm, the people who cannot hear a child cry and stay behind their walls, the people who do not weigh the cost of answering a cry in the dark, who simply answer it every time for strangers, for other species, for anything small and cold, and frightened that they happen to be close enough to hear. A people, the Veil came to say, that you could trust with your children, which is the highest trust there is, the only trust that truly matters, the one that no fleet or treaty or alliance can ever earn, and that humanity had earned from the Veil in a single night, by accident, by instinct, by one lonely woman doing the only thing her heart would let her do. The Veil became humanity's truest friends in that region of the galaxy, and it started with me and a storm and 2 tiny lives on my chest. Not with a war, not with a fleet, with the simplest thing in the world, someone going out into the dark because something small was crying and bringing it in and keeping it warm. The 2 princes are grown now. I raised them, helped raise them, alongside Isith and the whole warm, enormous hive, a second mother weaving in and out of their long Veil childhood. They are magnificent. They are kind, both of them, kind in a particular way that I like to think is partly mine, partly the warmth of that first night woven into what they are. And they still reach for me. That's the thing Isith promised that turned out truest of all. All these years, grown as they are, when I come to the hive, the 2 of them still come to me, still settle close, still make that low contentment thrumming they made the first night against my chest, the safe sound, the "you are my warm place" sound, and every time they do it, the cold place on my chest, the one I was so afraid of, fills all the way up, and I remember that I almost spent my whole life making sure it would stay empty. I think about that a lot, about the version of me that didn't hear them. The version that told herself the thin sound under the thunder was just the wind, and stayed warm and dry behind her walls, and never opened the airlock, and went on being good at being alone until being alone was the only thing left of her. That version of me is a ghost I think about often. She had her peace. She had her quiet fortress and her careful empty life, and her curtain hung over the cold place, and she would have kept all of it, safe and undisturbed, forever. And she would have missed everything, everything that ever mattered. 2 lives, a family, a queen who went low to thank her, a whole people who learned to trust humanity because of one storm night, all of it missed, because she stayed behind her walls. I'm so glad I heard them. I'm so glad I went out into the storm. I am older now, and I tell this story when people ask, because the galaxy still tells it wrong, still tells it as the dramatic one, the alien queen and the planet-wide hunt and the tense confrontation, all menace and spectacle. And that version isn't false exactly. The queen did declare a hunt, the hive did sweep the world, the soldiers did break down my door, all of that happened. But it was never a story about a hunt. Underneath the spectacle, it was the smallest and oldest story there is. It was about a mother who could feel her children dying in the dark and could not reach them. And it was about a stranger, alone on the far side of the world, who could reach them, who heard, somehow, two tiny cries over the roar of a whole storm, and got up and opened the door and went out into the worst night of the year, and picked up two dying things she did not recognize, and held them against her heart until they were warm. That's the whole of it, that's all it ever was. A cry in the dark, and someone close enough to hear, and willing to go. The alien queen declared a planet-wide hunt for her missing sons. And they were found, safe and warm and sound asleep, on a human's chest, held there all through the storm by a lonely woman who would have died before she let them go, and who got, in return for one night's warmth, the family she'd spent her whole life being too afraid to want. I heard them crying. I went out into the storm. Anyone close enough would have. Except, and I understand this now, finally, the way Isith understood it that first night, not anyone. You. It would have been you. That's the thing I've learned, telling this story all these years to people of every kind. The ones who lean in, the ones whose eyes go soft at the two tiny lives on the step, I know them now. They're the ones who would have heard it too, who would have opened the door, who can't hear something small crying in the dark without going out into the storm. If that's you, and if you've read this far, I think it's you. Then you already know the secret the Veil learned that night, the one worth more than any fleet or treaty or weapon in the whole wide galaxy. The cold place on your chest is not a wound to be guarded. It's a space that's waiting to be filled. Go out into the storm, something small is crying. You're close enough to hear.